everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel for a special program on family history research in Europe. My name is Ben Green, and I will moderate tonight's presentation. And I have a little surprise for all of you. I am not here solo this evening. Joining me live is our very own Lisa Friend, fresh off of her Village Europe presentation last week. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
And Lisa, in the spirit of this being a family history program, I presented, or prepared rather, a special dish from my family for you to enjoy. You have that there?
I do. I'm ready.
You saw it already? I made borscht.
It's so bright and colorful.
It is, yeah. Don't spill it, whatever you do. This is a recipe that I've enjoyed in my family for many years, and I've added it to the chat, and it'll be in the follow-up email as well. And Lisa, you must have sour cream with that.
Oh, thank you.
So let's.
Oh, it's still hot. That's great.
I'm glad. So this is a beet soup enjoyed in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Very hearty. There you go.
You can make this vegetarian or not vegetarian, right?
Correct. This has beef in it, this particular recipe that you'll find. And I'll just take a bite too before we move on. Cheers.
Cheers. I'm sorry. I was so excited about this. I went for it first.
Yeah, the color is very impressive.
Oh, the beef is tender. You did a good job.
Thank you. Yes, you boil it for an hour in the stock. Okay. Well, moving on, because we have a lot to cover, I'll just share a few points about the plan for this evening. So we will be hearing from wonderful genealogists from Ireland and Poland on their services and tips for family history research, as well as a representative from EPIC, the Irish Immigration Museum in Dublin. Looking forward to that segment. And so in this sense, we will be using Ireland and Poland as two example countries to help us receive some tips on researching family history. But a lot of the information that will be shared can be used for family history in other countries as well. We're just kind of using Ireland and Poland as examples. So as many of you know, we are not genealogists here at Rick Steves Europe. We can perhaps point you to a few resources potentially, but our expertise is travel. However, as you'll see, I think there is a place where travel and genealogy meet. So that is something we will be discussing later on as well. And as a side project, I've been working on my family history for about 15 years. So Lisa and I will share little short snippets from our family history research as well later on.
And we'll talk about the intersectionality of where our family's history and our boots on the ground experience, where they met.
Exactly. So just to give us a sense of where we're off to tonight, we will be starting in Kraków, Poland, one of my favorite places, where Tomasz Cebulski from Poland Travel will share details on ancestry research. We'll then go to Ostrog in Western Central Ukraine, where my great-grandparents are from. And then we will go over to Ireland to hear from Sean and Aisling near Dublin. They're from a private genealogy service, as well as hearing from Finola McDermott from EPIC, the Irish Immigration Museum. And then Lisa will share one of her family history stories from Germany at the end. So that is our agenda this evening. And, you know, I will make one important final note before we carry on, and that is today, January 27th, is the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And specifically today, January 27th, 2025, is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And Tomasz and Kraków will touch on this in just a moment. But I would definitely like to mention that in the chat and in the follow-up email tomorrow is a link where you can watch the recording of the memorial ceremony in which we hear from several survivors. There's very few left, and I think it's very important that we make sure that this horrific place and that this event is not forgotten. So I'll actually be watching the recording this evening when we are finished with our genealogy trip tonight. Okay, Lisa, are you ready to carry on to Poland?
I'm ready. I'm so excited to hear about all of the experts that you interviewed, because this is your show, Ben. I'm here to provide some moral support and tell a story, but this is your show. You've been working very hard on it, and you interviewed these people, and I think that it's going to be really great.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Off we go. Krakow is the best city, I think, in Europe, at least.
You know, it's my favorite in Poland.
No, thank you.
Well, hello, Tomasz. Thank you for joining us, taking some time to answer some questions about family history research in Poland.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the invitation, and it's all my pleasure to see you and see your audience today.
Tomasz, you're not able to join us live today, or on the 27th, rather, I should say, because it is the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation. What do you have going on that day?
Well, for the last 25 years, I'm also working very closely with the State Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau. Over 20 years ago, I started to act as a guide to that institution. I wrote a book on Auschwitz about the political aspects of Auschwitz commemoration, and I'm very active as a researcher and academic dealing with Auschwitz on a daily basis. So on the 27th, I wish I could be with you, but on the 27th, I will be inside a humongous tent, which is right now being built around the death gate of Birkenau. So one of those iconic places visually for the Auschwitz history. And this tent is mostly built in order to protect and shelter around 50 survivors who will be coming to the ceremony this year. Of course, those survivors will be the focal point of the ceremony itself. And in the last 20 years, the museum is an organizer of the anniversaries, especially those round anniversaries, has a very wise practice of side-tracking and sitting in a very comfortable seating all of the politicians who have arrived and make them listen to the survivors. So this is how the anniversary is going to be played also this year. So on the 27th of January, I'll be somewhere out there in the midst of the commemoration. So as much I would wish to be with you, with my heart and soul at that time, I will be somewhere closer to Auschwitz on that day.
Yeah, so that is perfectly understandable. And yes, I'm glad you'll be taking part in that powerful ceremony and event. That brings up an important point. So in Poland, of course, the Jewish history is very important and prominent, and then there's sort of non-Jewish Catholic history. It's very complex, would you say, the Polish history and the research that families may do.
Well, this country has around 10 centuries of well-documented or relatively well-documented history of complexities. And as a country of Central Europe, when you are centrally, you are becoming a country through which a lot of people are trespassing and staying and residing and trying to build a life, trying to settle down, trying to use an opportunity. And sometimes it works for a couple of generations, sometimes for 1, 2, 3, sometimes for a couple of centuries. The history of Polish Jews in Poland is 10 centuries. But it's not the only history of Polish diversity when it comes to Polish society. Just before the war, just before World War II, Poland was one of the most ethnically and religiously diversified countries in Europe, with close to 40% of different ethnic and religious minorities or groups inhabiting its territory. So all of this heritage is still partly physically here, assuming it wasn't completely destroyed and devastated in the course of a relatively short war, which was World War II, short but devastating. This heritage is still here. Of course, another assumption has to be done that this heritage was not destroyed and obliterated by the later, longer 45 years of Soviet communist domination, which brought enormous level of destruction, not only to physicality marking those minorities, but also to the documentation that those people produced, those communities produced. A lot of documentation was destroyed, replaced, moved all over Central Europe. And over the last 30 years, so since early 90s, so since another level of Polish liberation after the end of communism, there would be a major research by the Polish archival services trying to identify all over Central Europe and actually globally most of Polish belonging on this geography, belonging archival assets, so that we can build a coherent history about ourselves. because, well, without understanding where we are coming from, we have absolutely no sense of direction where we want to head in the future.
I think that Tomasz has touched on a really important point. We're researching documents to find out more about our family history and to potentially find out more about ourselves and our narrative of our family in the process, but also this is done on a societal level, on a national level as well. And a country like Poland, which has had a tumultuous history, is really working hard to use these documents to rebuild a solid framework and national story. So I think that that's very powerful, that what we're doing on an individual level adds up to a national story, a national narrative.
Yeah, very good point. And so what my takeaway is that documentation, historic documentation for family history researches still exists, but it may have been impacted by various events, particularly in the 20th century. Right? Is that true, would you say?
A lot of destruction, a lot of replacement, a lot of documents disappearing in various circumstances. I mean, you can spend your entire academical career in picking 100 kilometers of the Polish border and studying its changes over the 50 years. So with this level of changes, you need to remember that the documents which are concerning our lives are always produced locally. Yes? When you live somewhere in, let's say, Minnesota, the documents on your life and your family will be there. You have this comfort and honor of living in a country which within the last 2-3 centuries was not so much troubled and affected, but, well, Central Europe is different. In Central Europe, we do not have this sense of stability. We are trying to build it desperately, but history is always teaching us that all of those constructions are rather elusive.
And our ability to find information on our family's past, as Tomasz has said, is influenced by whether we can find the documents. And as he pointed out, we're very fortunate that we've had a stable political regime for 250 years. However, there have been events, nevertheless, which have impacted our ability to find documents. I'll point out that the census is a great resource for learning more about your family history in the US. And Lisa, have you ever looked up a census online? Because from 1950 back, they're available. They're public now.
Yes, Ben, before you were interested in your family's genealogy, I was interested in my family's genealogy. And this is before the internet. I actually went to the National Archives building in Seattle on Sandpoint Way and looked at the 1920 census. And I got really discouraged and actually put away my genealogical interest for quite a long time, because I looked at the 1920 census and my grandmother was missing. So my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, my great-uncle, all there, all where they're supposed to be. And I said, where's my grandmother? You know, she was 13 or 14 years old at the time. And the lady who was working there was like, well, girls weren't as important, or, you know, the census workers were unreliable. She could have been out of town. And I didn't have any depth of knowledge myself on genealogy. I was just sort of taking a flyer. And so I tried it, but I'm like, these were educated people. My grandmother went to Mills College in the University of Washington. They would have, said, hey, we have this 14-year-old girl living at home. But it made me doubt the veracity of the census for a while. And I had to put it away for a long time. So it kind of set me far back. But then the internet was invented and all genealogical stuff is revealed now behind the paywall.
Yes, and Tomasz will discuss that as well, the digitization of so many records. And I bring up the census now because there was a fire that destroyed much of the 1890 census. So we've had events in US history that have impacted our documentation and archives as well.
Can I add one thing? I learned this not that long ago, that some censuses were better than others because they don't always ask the exact same question.
Yeah.
So there are certain census years out there that genealogical experts know those are the really good ones. Like, did you own property? Did you not? And you can cross-reference things like tax lots, etc.
I can picture the specific censuses for some of my family as well, the 1900, the 1910, and O for owned or R for rented property, just as you said. Yeah, very helpful documents.
Thank you, Tomasz. And as you know, and as you've mentioned to me, a popular movie that recently was released, A Real Pain, tells a story of two cousins traveling to Poland from the United States and learning about their grandmother's heritage. And this movie was nominated for 4 Golden Globes, I believe. It was shown in movie theaters across much of the world, in Poland and the United States, certainly. Have you seen it, and what do you think of it?
Yeah, I watched the film. And the question is how much the film is about Poland and how much more it is about 2 New York cousins who might have been traveling through anywhere else in the world and having an interesting conversation. I mean, it's an interesting tragicomedy, I would say, that is happening in between the 2 characters. The setting in the background plays a secondary role. The story of a grandma is mentioned in passing, I would say. It's more being existing there in the background in a certain symbolic way, then we can really access and touch that history. Because we don't have any details, we don't have any facts. Apart of the fact that it was probably somewhere in the beautiful city of Krasnystaw, in the Lublin district, where the boys are finally finishing, I would say this genealogy and Polish history and Polish Jewish history theme is playing the 3rd violin in the row of this otherwise New York drama that is happening. So.
That is a fair point. The characters and their development and story is certainly central. Yes, still perhaps worthwhile viewing. It's still presents Poland, and I thought particularly Warsaw and Lublin quite beautifully.
For somebody who wants to visit Poland, particularly for the first time, probably I can't imagine a better first step and a visual introduction into what Poland is. I mean, you cannot dive into too deep waters at first because Central European history can make you drown very fast. So I think a film like this is actually a great beginning.
Have you seen A Real Pain, Lisa?
I have not seen it. It is on my list because it just got nominated for some Academy Awards, so I
Right.
will see it.
Right. And, it's a fabulous comedy drama, regardless of whether you have Polish heritage or not. It's certainly worth watching. And I believe it was recently made available for streaming on Hulu. So that is where you can find it.
We can have a movie night.
Yeah, I agree. Switching gears a little bit, Tomasz, to family history research questions and how our audience can approach this. From the beginning, if you're just interested in your family history, where should you begin? And it may be, as you sort of alluded to just now, conversation. But what do you suggest?
First, you need to probably identify what you are specifically interested in. Secondly, I would actually recommend you to have a good conversation with your close family members. That's always a starting point. We are always kind of glancing over this part and skipping into the core research because we have no idea how much of this information is hidden in the family lore, family stories, family documents. Quite often your grandma or your grandpa or your auntie knows much more than you think she does or he does. And it's just showing them a little bit of care and giving them a little bit of patience in order to get the story from them, to get the documents from them. It's like peeling an onion sometimes of those conversations, especially if you're talking with older people. Give them space, give them time, and show them interest, and the stories may come. If they don't, or if the stories are confusing, they might be prompting you into digging some more. And of course, genealogy as science and a research method was completely revolutionized within the last 30 years. Most of the data available online, and I'm not talking only about the indices, the records, and some kind of family lines which genealogists are building. I'm talking about hard records which are fully scanned and copied and made available by Polish state archives, or by all kinds of other websites which are kind of conglomerating records or conglomerating indices. When it comes to Polish Jewish genealogy, definitely GRI Poland, so Jewish Records Indexing Poland. When it comes to Polish Christian genealogy, There are a couple of websites like genbaza.pl or genealogy.pl. So there are a couple of services which are worth your attention in order to have kind of a first introduction into what is out there. And sometimes people are really shocked and surprised of how much data from 200 years is flowing straight into the screen when they are sitting somewhere in Hawaii. The next point that I wanted to mention is you should look into the immigration records into the United States. Because even if you have in the family lore that, oh, they came from somewhere in Russia, and you don't know whether the name of the city was Minsk or Pinsk or whatever else, you can try to put it into the Ellis Island website, which offers an ample of ship manifests from the period of, let's say, 1880 till 1926, which was the largest wave of immigration, but even they are offering records of passage and ship manifests up until 47, 48 even. So even for the survivors that were entering the United States after 1945. And that's also a wonderful starting point, because you can find the details of your grandparents and you can learn whether they had $2 or $3 in their pockets when they hit Ellis Island.
Yes, I believe my great-grandmother had 10, if I remember correctly from the document.
I mean, 10 was, I think, the minimal at a certain point.
Okay, that was a fairly meaty section. Tomasz covered quite a few essential details. First off, talking to your family. It's better to do it sooner rather than later, and we'll touch on that again actually shortly. I recommend recording it with your phone. It's a great thing to have later on. Sometimes, though, it's not possible. I mean, I think we can't overlook this fact, right? Either you don't have family, or they don't remember, or they're not willing to talk, and that's just a reality. So this is a good starting point, but sometimes you can only get so much from this. And Lisa, have you ever interviewed or talked with a family member about your heritage?
Oh, yes. This was just a love of mine always. I don't know why, but I would go and visit my grandmother. I didn't have any grandfathers. They passed away before I was born, but my grandmother, my grandma Kay, I would go to her house and I would ask her about every picture, every person in every picture on the wall. I would ask her about dishes, and then she would take me to the cemetery in Hood River and she would talk about the family members that were buried there. So I knew this whole galaxy of people that all passed away before I came along, and I loved hearing their stories.
That can be a wonderful thing, And Tomasz also mentioned online resources. Of course, there's many from like conglomerates like ancestry.com. He touched on immigration records, which are fantastic. That's a great resource. And actually, we've linked in the chat to Ellis Island resources where you can see your ancestors' immigration to the United States. Up next, I asked Tomasz about challenges in researching online documents, including name changes. And as many of us know, when you come to the US, oftentimes your surname changed, and that can present a whole slew of issues when researching your family history.
It's more complicated than we think. Yes, before the German Nazis established Auschwitz and then Birkenau concentration camps in the year of 1940 and then Birkenau in 1942, Oświęcim, because of its geolocation and the fact that it was sitting on the major international rail junction at the time from 1860s, from 1880s till 1926, Oświęcim was our end of Ellis Island. Most of the Christians and Jews, and the numbers are millions, that emigrated into the United States within this time period of 1880, 1926, from Galicia, from Austro-Hungarian Empire, but also other parts of Austro-Hungarian Empire.
You mentioned many good points here. I am taking away to start speaking with your family, and I might add, doing it sooner rather than later, while those family members are around, the family members you currently have, and are lucid enough to discuss.
Well, let me put it like this. The sooner you start speaking to your family, the less money and time you'll need to spend with a guy like me later.
Right, and it's not just in Poland where this happens. So it took me many years to find my great-grandmother's Ellis Island record, because I was searching, we would say in English, Cebulski, or Swyszewski, perhaps you might, closer to what you might say. When, of course, it was entered as Swyszewska, for years I couldn't find it. And then finally I became bright enough and I said, oh, well, in Poland you would have it as an A, even though in the US we don't do that. I changed it and voila. So for some people, this could be an obstacle as well, wouldn't you say? This fact that the name changes so much.
Technology to the rescue. Within the last 20, 30 years, most of the algorithms working as search engines in any kind of genealogy resources are introducing pretty sophisticated soundex mechanisms of going across hundreds of versions of spellings, of name spellings, surname spellings, and they feed you with all kinds of results, which is sounding similar. You can actually kind of narrow it down into exact sounding, close sounding, phonetic sounding, language, and so on. And as you say, based on your own discovery, the thing I'm finding the most interesting and fascinating in genealogy research itself is a journey, it's a travel, it's a trip.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I'm usually trying to say to the people who are in contact with me at first, especially if they are very demanding for seeing records and having the hardcore documentation here and now. I'm spending some time in trying to convince those people that, yes, I can produce those records and I can send it in any form you want me to send it. But if you don't understand the broader context of how those documents were produced, for whom they were produced, in what circumstances, and what was the cause-effect relationship of the moment with the person, with the document, you will never get the meaning of what happened in that family dynamic, what was abandoned, what was left behind, what you were forced to do. So you are completely missing the entire context of life from a record only. And as I said, genealogy research is a journey, is a travel. And within this travel, you acquire knowledge of history, you acquire knowledge of people, you acquire knowledge of circumstances of life, of war, of death, trauma, and anything else that is becoming a function of human life on this planet. And only when you have this complete picture, I can call a genealogy program and project complete.
I love the way Tomasz eloquently explained where travel and genealogy meet and the importance and the value of traveling to the place of your family heritage if you're able to.
Yeah, I actually researching my family. Not all of this has to relate back to Europe, right? Like I found out where my grandmother was born in Indianapolis, and I would like to go to Indianapolis someday. I'd love to go to Ellis Island someday and just be, in that space where all of these people started their American dream.
Yeah, excellent point, Lisa.
Very well put. I love the way you explained that. And at what point should someone reach out to an expert like yourself or your colleagues at Polin? Is it sort of after you've had a conversation with family and you've done some online searching and you're interested in traveling to Central Europe? What would you say?
So my work is mostly integrating different fields. So I'm an academic, so I can research documents and provide them. As you hear, I like to build narratives and talk about it, which is the essence of us learning something. But I'm usually trying to convince people that they also want to travel to the geography. They want to physically be at the places. They want to physically be present in the family house or in the place where the family house used to be. They want to be present at the cemetery. They want to see some of the documents and touch some of the documents. So sometimes I'm deliberately doing 80% of the genealogy research in the archive ahead of somebody's visit, but I'm leaving this 20%. I'm leaving this opportunity of spending only 3 hours out of 30 with somebody touching the document of birth of his father being signed by his grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Because a picture of such a document, if I take it, of course, is telling and important. But if you are in the specific register office in Łódź, and you are facing a document written 100 or 120 years ago of birth of your father, and there's a hand signature of your grandfather on it, And it's a perfect mixture of history, circumstances, geography, space in which you are. Then the experience is way more complete than me just sending the document, even with the best of my explanations that I can do to that.
Yes, and that is absolutely fantastic. And from my own time in Poland, I can certainly agree that traveling to the place really brings you much more than just researching online.
Being there physically and seeing the documents, that's something I've never done. And I can just begin to imagine it because the documents of my family that I have are so beautiful. They have great calligraphy, and just being there, I would love to experience that. And without someone like Tomasz, that would be much more difficult to do, especially in a place like Poland. Wouldn't you say, Lisa? I mean,
I think there are times when you really need an expert. I was looking at something in my records today, and I realized, like, I can't read this, not because my German is so bad, and my German is bad, but because I can't read the Gothic calligraphy. So yeah, there are times you're going to need an expert.
And that's where, as you say, you come in. And how would, let's say, someone doesn't have Polish ancestry, they have Italian or French ancestry. I mean, I'm just curious what you would suggest on how people can find a service like yours, because I think that's an issue that sometimes people have, is that they just don't know who to connect with and where to find these services.
Everything is online those days. As I say, I would start with asking your family members. I would start to ask for specific names and surnames and geographies. For me as a genealogist, the first question I'd ask you is where, the name of a place. Because if I know the place, I know which archive I have to look and which city records I have to research, yes? So for me, the fundamental first way of pinning down the history is the geography. I need to have it pinned down geographically. Then the second question is about time. When? Whether it was mid-1800s that they've left, or after World War II that they've left, because those are completely different archival resources that I need to take into consideration. So space and time matters in genealogy. And I would first get even with those basic facts if you are just starting. And then I would try to look online for somebody who is regionally working in the genealogy in this particular region. That would be probably the best, or somebody who covers that region. Actually, Facebook or social media is a wonderful resource. So just after you type the name of your family and place into Google, probably the second place you want to type is type it into maybe Facebook research machine and add the word genealogy into that. Because you might be surprised that there's not one, but 5 pages, which one is processing old imagery of a place, like old photos. Another one is researching genealogy data. And the third one is talking about general history of the region. Creative or devastating. So you can use social media very creatively those days and find a lot of interesting data out there. And people, because it's sometimes easier to connect with a person locally through social media than through websites and Google. Yeah? So it's just easier to ask somebody a question directly in social media who happens to live in the city that you are interested in. Yeah?
Excellent points. Yes, and I can say that I've found various cousins of mine from this region of Western Ukraine, Eastern Poland, via social media. So it does work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a wonderful tool. Sometimes you're finding people that you then regret that you found them.
That is a risk. Yes. There are many rewards, wouldn't you say, to researching your family heritage, but there's also can be some difficulties as well, for sure.
That's the beauty. It's just like any good travel that you take in your life. You just need to have your head open. You just need to continue talking to people, and you learn a lot. You just learn a lot without too much effort, I would say. Without sitting and studying a book, you are just studying the geography, people, and landscape, and the information flows as long as you are curious and have your brain open.
Thank you very much, and all the best to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, and take good care of yourself, and don't forget today to remember, at least for a split of a second, that 8 years ago, a site called Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated after 5 years plus of its existence. And do not forget that by even watching the later YouTube recorded ceremony, you may still hear from survivors. And there's less and less of them, and we live in a pretty dangerous moment of losing the prime memory of those who are the direct witnesses. And very soon we'll be left only with a secondary memory, which means a produced memory, which is not necessarily as accurate and as telling as the prime one. So just spend a split of a second today on thinking about the reality 8 years ago. And there's an ample of tools online in which you can still hear survivors telling these stories.
Thank you so much, Tomasz.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Tomasz is such a wealth of knowledge. It was really a pleasure to meet him and talk with him. And his link is in the chat and in the follow-up email if anyone is interested in reaching out for assistance with travel to Poland or help with their family research there. And up next, we're going to travel a few hours east to the hometown of my great-grandparents. We'll cross over today, what is today the border of Ukraine, to Ostrog. This is what Ostrog looked like in 1910 when my great-grandmother was a small child. This was actually her postcard that she took to the United States with her. Ostrog was an important town on the western end of the Russian Empire at this time. It was taken by the empire in the late 18th century. It was part of the Pale of Settlement where Jews were allowed to live permanently. So a large portion of the town's population were Jewish at that time. And my great-grandmother, Helena, was the oldest child. She's here on the right in about 1915, this picture. The family was fairly well off at this time. They had a maid and a horse-drawn carriage. And although today Ukrainian is the principal language of this region, at the time they spoke Russian. Russian was their mother tongue. It's what they spoke at home as well, because it was a language of political and economic advancement. So if you spoke Russian, you generally had some more opportunities. But World War I and the Russian Revolution, which began at about this time, would change their lives forever. My grandmother's father, Alexei, was a cavalry colonel in the Russian army during the war. On his chest, you can see several medals with the bust of the last Tsar, Nicholas II. In 1918, during the Russian Revolution, he was killed. And with the Tsar overthrown, officers specifically were increasingly targeted. And so my family destroyed all documents and personal possessions of his out of concern that they would be harmed if someone found out they were related to someone with his former position. So there was a period of several years of war and a shortage of many goods, and several other family members died as well. So it was a really terrible time for many people in this region. A few years later, Poland, newly reborn. Poland didn't exist as an independent country for more than a century. It did, though, from 1918 on. Poland took over Ostrog. It was the border town between it and the Soviet Union in the interwar period. So in fact, there were some portions of Ostrog that you weren't allowed to enter because it was considered a border territory. And of course, the border with the Soviet Union was a very hard border. This is my great-grandmother on the right, and on the left is her closest friend throughout her childhood and early adulthood, Anna Sussman. And this is from about 1925, so exactly 100 years ago. And Anna was Jewish. Before the War and Revolution, her family was quite wealthy. They owned a really successful shop in the town. And it was an example of Orthodox and Jewish families who had lived together for centuries, forming close friendships, even though there was a lot of anti-Semitism during this time. And what was really heartbreaking for my great-grandmother was that Anna and her family were killed outside of town in the forest in the Second World War. My great-grandmother kept this photo hanging for 75 years, and then my grandpa had it hanging for 25 years, and now it's one of my favorite photos. And you know, we remember their friendship really well, even though it was from 100 years ago. My great-grandmother came to the US 100 years ago now. And I will add that born outside of Poland's boundaries, actually, my great-grandmother was not recognized as a Polish citizen. When she came to the United States in 1927, she was issued a special document, this document that you see here. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It was among a series of documents agreed to by the newly formed League of Nations to deal with millions of stateless people and refugees from the former Tsarist Empire. And it was the first official refugee travel document, actually. It's just gorgeous, as I said. I've recently had it restored by an archivist. It's much bigger than this, and it's multiple pages, and it now hangs in the entryway of my apartment. So this is just a brief look at some of the history of my great-grandmother. There are many other stories I could share. By the time I was born, she was 90 years old. That's me on the left. She enjoyed getting her exercise by taking me for walks. But as is what happens in life, a few years later, we essentially switched roles, right? And I was pushing her around. Much of what I shared here comes from my family research, and I used many of the tools collectively that have been discussed by Tomasz so far. I used social media and found relatives in Ukraine. I found a local genealogist in Ostrog who was able to help a bit as well, and I researched online documents, including the Ellis Island immigration records, among many others. So it's a proof that you too can find out more about your family history, even if they're from a small town in Ukraine. So that's just a little piece of my family history, and I'm glad that I got to know my great-grandmother. She was a really special lady.
Have you been to Ostrog?
I have not, actually. I wanted to go. I started really digging into this more in 2020. So of course there was COVID then, and then now there's the war in Ukraine. So I'm ready to go. But I'll just wait for the situation to be a little bit better for them. Yeah. And next, we move on to Ireland, I believe, Lisa. You ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay. We will hear from Finola McDermott from Epic. So we're kind of switching gears a little bit because we're going to hear from Finola about an immigration museum, which can be an excellent resource as well.
Hi, Finola. Thank you so much for joining me for a few minutes to share a bit about Epic. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ben. How are you?
Splendid. Thank you. Excited to learn a bit about the amazing museum you work for. Please tell us more.
Perfect. Well, yes, I work for Epic, the Irish Immigration Museum. So Epic is located in Dublin, Docklands. Dublin, Docklands would have been the kind of hub for people emigrating out of Ireland. So it's kind of the perfect location to celebrate this story. Epic itself opened in 2016. It was started by our founder, Neville Isdale. Neville is an Irish immigrant himself, leaving from County Down. So he had always had a passion to tell the story of Irish emigration because it is a great story. Roughly about 70 million people worldwide can claim Irish ancestry. So you'll find us everywhere. We've kind of spread all over the world, which is an amazing feat for such a small country. Epic itself, if we delve into it, tells the story of true Irish immigration, how Irish culture, Irish influence has kind of spread throughout the world. The museum itself tells the story of about the 10 million people that have left Ireland over the years. So that's a huge number of people that have emigrated out of the country. We look at why they left. So that's the good, the bad, the ugly side of it, unfortunately. So there are some stories obviously linked to the Irish famine, which took place in the 1800s in Ireland. But we also look at people that left for other reasons. Someone like Ernest Shackleton, who was an Arctic explorer, unfortunately couldn't do that in Ireland, so he did have to leave to take on that career. So we are looking at all the reasons why people choose to leave. We also look then at what these people did when they went abroad. What was their kind of, influence, how they impacted the world. And then we look a little bit about Irish culture. So we look at why is St. Patrick's Day the most celebrated holiday around the world? We look at Irish literature, Irish film, Irish TV, Irish music. Again, some of these big things that are celebrated around the world. As you can see from the images on screen, Epic is actually a fully digital museum. It was the world's first fully digital museum. So that's kind of an exciting point to it. It's separated into 20 interactive galleries. And each of these galleries has a different theme, something different that it's looking at, whether it's looking at the notorious Irish. These are the people that maybe we shouldn't claim as being Irish, but they're quite fun people to talk about. People like Ned Kelly, and Bonnie, who was the famous pirate queen. And then we look at stuff like the Irish in science, the Irish in technology. So someone like Henry Ford, what's his link back to Ireland? So you might find in the museum, not necessarily all of them left from Ireland, but they may have had family members, like their parents or their grandparents, who left at the time as well. So we kind of have a broad range of people that we look at in the museum. Roughly, there's about 300 individual stories in the museum. So there's a lot there to discover. I do always say to people though, you don't have to be Irish to enjoy the museum. Emigration is a universal story. So everybody who walks into that museum does see their own family in it, whether you've emigrated from Italy, Poland, Mexico, it doesn't matter. You will see your family in that story. And I also think to understand Ireland as it is now, you kind of have to understand Ireland through the years and see what actually was happening and why so many people left and how that has influenced the culture that we have now.
Have you been to Epic, Lisa?
I have not. I have not. I really wanted to, and I was traveling with my family the last time I had the opportunity, and we went to the Wax Museum instead, which had a lot of good Irish history stuff in it. But no, I wanted to go here, but it didn't work out. We did do the Jeannie Johnston famine ship, which is an emigration story. It was this like one of the safest famine ships that went across, and so you could see what the situation was for people who were emigrating. But I've not been here yet. Thank you for asking.
I didn't quite realize that Epic is in our Ireland guidebook with 2 triangles for try hard to see. So I'll definitely add it to my list for consideration when next in Dublin. It looks excellent, regardless of whether you have Irish ancestry or not, as Finola says.
And that leads me on to the other part of Epic. So while the museum itself looks at this amazing story of Irish immigration, we do also want to give people the chance to discover their own family history as well. In the museum, we have our own genealogy centre, which is called the Irish Family History Centre. And this is where you get to meet your own personal genealogist and maybe delve a little bit more into your own family history. Genealogy research is probably one of the funnest things you can actually look into. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is not necessarily going into the in-depth of how you do genealogy, but just some of the fun facts and the fun stuff that we use in the museum to discover people's family history. You might kind of ask, God, what do I need to start my family research? Do I need to know lots of information? And we say no, luckily enough. We always say the main thing to do is to know a name. So if you know any of your ancestors' name, even a date that they may have left Ireland, even if it's a rough date, and also if you know roughly the location that they may have left from. But the biggest thing you need to have coming into a genealogy centre is kind of the passion to want to discover it. Because there is a little bit of work involved, but it is really fun kind of work to, as you can imagine, discover where did they go here, why did they go there, all that sort of stuff with it. In our centre, we always say you start with yourself, you work backwards. Yeah, that's the trick to genealogy, discovering your family history. You start with yourself and then see how far you can go back. Another great thing to do is obviously if you can put together a family tree. So we always say to anyone coming into our Meet Our Genealogist, bring everything you have, even if you've had to draw your own family tree out, just the information you have. Makes it easier for the genealogist to kind of have a brief look and go, okay, this is our starting point. This is where we're going to start the family research. This is what we're going to go through. The great thing with genealogy research is it's not just looking at stuff like marriage records, death records, birth records. They're the traditional stuff and we know we have to look at them. But in the Irish Family History Centre, they kind of have a few, what would you call them? A few kind of funner ways of discovering your family history and a little bit of fun facts about you. One of the funnest ones they use is dog licenses, actually. So if you've ever wanted to know your great-great-great-grandfather's dog, there's a way of doing it. The reason they would use dog licenses is because you had to put all your information on it. So you had to give full information, your name, where you lived, all of that information. Another great one to use. Some people might not want to use this one, but it is good, is looking at the petty crime records as well. One of our genealogists famously found a lot of information on her grandfather through this. And how she managed to do that was he was a pub owner, decided to keep his pub open a little bit late one night. Of course, there was a police record, led to a petty crime report, led to a newspaper article. So she's actually discovered an awful lot about her grandfather purely from the fact that he had a little bit, kept the business open a little bit longer than he should. But I always say the petty crimes are very much there as they sound. They're petty. There could be something like your cow got loose and was in someone else's farm. So there's going to be a petty crime report on it. So we say to people, don't worry if your ancestors end up there. It doesn't mean they've done anything bad. It's likely it was kind of more fun, simple little mistake back in the day.
Well, Lisa, now we have another reason to follow the law, right? We don't want our descendants finding out about our petty crimes, do we?
Oh, I'm sure with the stuff that's online these days, my descendants will learn everything about me.
I'm never going to look at a parking ticket the same way again, if I'm honest with you.
Another thing that we do use on site in the museum, in the Irish Family History Centre, is DNA research. Now, this we don't use all the time. This is very much for anyone who maybe we've hit a little bit of a roadblock with your family research. Maybe the names aren't giving as much information as we need. So we will sometimes do a DNA test. Just sometimes it helps us to push forward with the research. It gives us just a little bit more data than we will find sometimes with looking through records and stuff like that. The great thing is, at the Irish Family History Centre, particularly if you've hit that roadblock in your own research and you need an expert to pop in and help you, we have different options. So we have experts that can do, as you can see on the screen, 50 or 80-minute consultations with you. These are great consultations because you'll actually get to sit with one of our genealogists. They will do the research with you. So you get to learn actually how to be a genealogist while doing your own family research, which is great. And as I said previously, you just have to bring what you have with you. You don't need to be running around trying to discover your whole family history in advance. They will do a lot of it for you. The other one we do have is what we call our genealogy research. This is a little bit more in depth, Ben. It kind of goes into the delves of what we actually do in the museum. It does mean booking a little bit in advance of your visit, just because we need to take a little bit of time with this. And in this, what we do is one of our genealogists, once you book, will contact you. They'll get all the information you have. They will go off, do your family research for you. And then when you come and visit, they will present everything to you. So you'll have your whole family history will be presented. They will keep in contact during the process as well, just in case they need any extra information, want to ask any questions along the way. So this is a really kind of in-depth experience. And it's something that you're not going to get in most places. You're not going to get to sit with a genealogist who's actually gone and done all your family research for you. So it's a really, really interesting experience. And as I say, both of these consultations, they can be done over Zoom or they can be done in person. So if someone is in the US or in Canada and does want to do their family history, but isn't planning to travel to Ireland just yet, they can do this with our genealogist. And the great thing is then when they do get to visit Ireland, they can go to all the places that they actually found out that their family is from. So it works really well in that sense. So that's just a snippet of what we do at EPIC and also at the Irish Family History Centre. So if anyone does have any questions, or if you do, Ben, happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Finola. That was fantastic. I have quite a few questions. I'm only going to get to a few of them, I think. For
No
now.
problem.
I love this idea of creating a story about your ancestor because, I studied history in college, and stories, they tell history so well. And on a personal level, you then form connections with the broader history. And that's what EPIC is doing here, right? Taking individual stories and telling a broader narrative, a broader history, as diverse as the individual stories might be. And I think that's just amazing.
It is. And I mean, you'll find people in the museum, you'll find well-known celebrities in the museum who emigrated. You'll also find people that you may not have ever heard of, but have really, really interesting stories. For example, we have a lady in the museum called Margareta Eager. So probably never heard of her, but she was actually a nanny for the last Russian Tsar, which is very interesting for a young Irish lady from Limerick. And the reason that she emigrated was because Irish nannies were really, really popular around the world. So a lot of Irish women would have emigrated to be Irish nannies. And that's some of the stories we're telling in the museum. You don't need to be the most famous person out there. You don't need to be Bram Stoker writing about Dracula. It's everyday people that would have left that have this story to tell of why they were leaving Ireland and what were the factors that led to it.
Oh, I love it. And this brings up the point of course, EPIC for Ireland, but there's other immigration museums in Germany. I think Bremerhaven has one, and so on. So if people have ancestry in other countries and they're interested in family research, they should definitely consider a museum like EPIC in that country, perhaps, to start their research. I'm not sure if all of them offer the kind of genealogy services one-on-one that EPIC does, but something to definitely keep in mind.
Exactly. And I mean, you'll find in most countries, even if they don't have the one-to-one genealogy that we offer, you can definitely access archives and have a look and kind of discover your own family history. And the great thing about that is you will always find someone that has a little bit of knowledge of kind of where to point you in the right directions, what archives to look at. We're very lucky. We obviously have our professionals here that can kind of point people in the right directions. But even we've had people visit the museum that on kind of a bit more delving into their family history, they might discover actually it's not Irish roots they have, it's Scottish. And our genealogists are still able to kind of point them in the right direction and say, okay, for your Scottish records, this is where you need to go. Or for your Irish side, this is where you need to go. So it's all about just finding the right person and kind of the starting point. And as I said, the starting point is really a name. If you have a name, if you have a little bit of information about where they left from, you usually can start the process pretty well from there.
And would someone be able to research anything on their own at Epic? Or is it primarily?
They don't have research on their own, no. They would need to sit with a genealogist just to access the archives with them. Because it's all online, the genealogists do all that information for you. But as I mentioned, they can do it on Zoom in advance if they wanted to. And if they aren't planning to visit Ireland anytime soon, but they want to maybe start that process of looking at their own family history. And the great thing is with the sessions, they are kind of doing the genealogy research with the genealogist. So once they finish the session, there's nothing stopping them going and kind of doing their own thing after that. You know, they'll have learned some of their skills and they'll have someone to help them along at that process.
Ah, that's wonderful. You know, I have one second great grandparent from County Down myself.
Very good. we'll be able to find something.
And my final question is a personal one. Have you researched your family history and what have you
Do you
learned?
know what, my family history, the first time I went to the Family History Centre, I typed in both my family names and it was really boring because it came up with exactly where I was from. And I went, okay. And it's funny, they kind of were able to pinpoint exactly that they came from two different towns, but in the same part of Ireland that they still live in now. So they were really good. They were able to link it back that way. And I was going, oh, okay, nothing too exciting. Then they go, oh, not everyone's had to emigrate around the world. I was going, okay, well, at least. But you know what? The amazing thing was the fact that two names, they could pinpoint exactly where they came from and find the family links all the way back. So it was really quite cool to see how they were able to do that. I kind of didn't expect it to be so in-depth with such simple information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, remarkable. Well done. Now, I mean, everyone's family story is different, and I think
Exactly.
they're all interesting if you are able to find the right information, at least.
That's it, exactly. And that's what the Irish Family History Centre is about. It's about kind of finding that information that maybe people have missed or maybe can't find themselves and just kind of filling in the blanks in the family history.
Oh, incredible. Well, thank you so much, Finola. I don't have any more questions for you for now. I really appreciate you taking the time to share more about Epic and have this discussion with me. So thank you again very much.
No problem. Thank you very much, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Can I just say that is so cool? They offer a service that's basically like finding your roots with Henry Louis Gates, right?
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
And she sort of answered my question which was, oh, would you do that for my Welsh family? Because I'm more Welsh than I am Irish, but you've got some County Down going on with you, so you could take advantage of that.
I certainly could, and I think I have tried to research more about that portion of my family history, and it's been difficult. So I may be in touch with Finola later on. And I will just, to elaborate on what she mentioned here, a couple points. DNA, right? We haven't really talked about that. In my experience, and it depends, in my experience, it's good for broader understanding of your family heritage, because first and foremost, it gives you sort of a profile of where your ancestors were from. So that is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily connect you with specific people. It can, either if you have an expert, maybe dig deeper with it, or if a relative on Ancestry, for example, has also taken a DNA test, then Ancestry will connect that. But you've done it, DNA, Lisa, haven't you? What is your experience with it?
It's a little cold, right? It doesn't tell you, oh, I'm like 5% Italian. That's great, but I know nothing about that side of the family or how that came in. And so I'm like, well, it's not really much I can do with. So the tracing of the people is more interesting to me.
Right. So depending on the specific circumstances and who's looking at and interpreting your DNA, it's maybe just one piece of the puzzle, right? One tool to help you understand your heritage more. And then just to emphasize the point about immigration museums, that is something that I have not considered up until this point, until hearing from Finola, because there's many immigration museums. There's a couple in Germany, there's one in London, in Paris, in Brussels, and beyond. So why not send a message to an immigration museum if there's one in the area where your family's from, and see if they can possibly assist you. And of course, not all of them have EPIC's high level of services, but still, that's a good starting point at least.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so a little bit more in Ireland. We'll go to genealogists Sean and Aisling. Hi, Sean. Hi, Aisling. Thank you so much for taking some time to discuss your work, your services, and family history research in Ireland. How are you both doing?
Oh, we're great today.
Great,
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's our pleasure. I understand you have a few things to share with us about your work. I'll hand it off to you.
Oh, we'd love to. Thanks, Ben. Well, hi, all. My name's Aisling, and this is my dad, Sean Quinn. My Ireland Heritage is our family business, and it was born out of a passion that my father, Sean, actually had for genealogy and the quest for our own family history, the Quinn family. We are quite unusual business, as we are a one-stop shop for all your Irish genealogy research, any customised ancestral townland experience tours, and also self-drives. This will enable you to visit your ancestors' exact location. We specialise in genealogy research from the 1700s, the 1800s, and right up to 1911.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Quinn, and as Aisling says, we specialise in a 10-yard location for a cottage, usually between 1700 and 1900, but most particularly in the 1800s when large immigration took place. And the 10-yard location will give you the correct church for baptismals, marriages, ceremonies, and will also give you the exact graveyard that the family once used. And of course, if their family's still on site in situ when we get back there, all the more reason they're your family, which is tremendous. Our connection with Rick Steves goes back 12 years now, and we're happy and proud to be part of that connection. And the fact that his clients are world travelers and like to get off the beaten track is something that appeals to us, because we are very much about getting off the beaten track. I'm in tourism all my life since I was a young man, and I like to see people getting off the beaten track. 40% of what we do is unfindable from a genealogy perspective, but we do it with certification and documentation. So no matter how small the information you have, we are proud of the fact that we can find it for you.
So guys, as Sean said, we're very proud of what we do, and we find our business incredibly rewarding. We have people that visit alone, they visit with family, or they visit with their friends. And those who, as we like to call it, come home, are often moved to tears. It's a very powerful moment to be able to stand in the ruins of the home that your ancestors once lived in, where they chatted about their daily lives and where they planned their futures. To be able to walk the land they once walked, to be able to walk the land they once worked on, and to be able to worship in the church, to see the church they once worshipped in, is a very moving experience. In actual fact, many years ago, we had a wonderful couple from the USA actually come home to Ireland, and they had their grown-up children all visit with them. And they renewed their wedding vows in the exact same church that their ancestors actually had their marriage in the 1800s before they emigrated, which was an incredibly special experience, and we were honoured to be part of.
So there are a number of challenges ahead of you when you are doing the records and your research. On the 30th of June in 1922, in the Civil War, the Four Courts building and the Customs House building lost a lot of records, not only church records, but also medieval records. But that doesn't deter us from finding what we want to find for you. And when you travel, when you are searching to travel, the most important thing is the townland. It'll always be in Gaelic. And the townland will have no markings when you get here. I often say it's not like a 6,000 square foot house on the end of the I-4 or the end of the I-5. It's off the beaten track. It's usually in the emigration periods. And as I say, no markings. To give you an example in Gaelic, a kill is a church. One famous one is Killarney, the Church of the Slows. Clonmel in Tipperary, a clon is a meadow, mel is honey. It's the meadow of honey. And a most beautiful one down through the years I've always stood by, Donegal. A dún is a fort in Gaelic, and Donegal, the fort of the foreigner, also called Donegal. So the Gaelic language is still held dear to our hearts. So a townland can be small, can be 100 acres, or it can be 7,000 acres. And specifically what we do is to reduce this with documentation and certified down to 10 yards. And that will give you, as I say, the correct church and the correct graveyard also.
We have a 95% success rate of finding your ancestors' exact location. We work with people from anywhere from 6 years to 3 weeks. So don't be afraid to get in touch, and we will help you start this incredibly powerful journey.
Finally, guys, a couple of good tips for you. Be careful where you take your information at your source. It is very important that you have the correct information. Typical emigration period is the famine, 1845 to 1851. 550,000 people alone go to New York. There are 7 volumes of books for that period, just name after name, 2 volumes actually for 1 year. And the worst year of the famine is Black 47, 280,000 die, and so many more emigrate. So be careful when you get your information that it is correct. A couple of tips to you, and you guys are very lucky in your country. You will get the parents' names, as in my case, Sean or John Quinn. My father's name is John Quinn. My mother's name is Jane Martin, and everybody called her Maureen Martin. So there's a lot of flexibility on names, but you must have those names. Where can I get them? Well, at your source, tremendous. You can get them on the death certificates, or you can get them on the marriage certificates. And once you have something like that, or a general area, or a general year when the person is born, we can help you get back to your ancestor and get back to the place that matters for you in Ireland.
Well, first off, Lisa, I love how they can reduce the townland, as they call it, to 10 yards and find out exactly where your family lived. And they shared a few other stories with me where they found someone's townland that they were working with, and there was still a home there after 200 years, that the relatives were still living there when they came and visited. Other examples where there was just ruins on that plot of land where there was formerly a family house, and the visiting descendant was able to take pieces from those ruins back home with them. So it's very unique to be able to, with such success, go and find where your family lived. Yeah, I would love to do that. And he also mentioned birth, marriage, and death records. That's very important, of course, and something that can get overlooked, that you can go, if you know, that's the important thing, is these are local records generally. I mean, sometimes maybe state records, but often they're local records. If you know where an ancestor or family member was born or got married or died, you can generally obtain that record and perhaps learn more that way as well.
And don't forget baptism.
Yeah.
Baptismal certificates also come with a lot of information if you can find them.
And Sean also made an important suggestion that we should pay attention when we're researching to make sure that the person that we found is actually our ancestor, right? Because there's so many situations, especially on major websites, where it suggests that you found someone, or it suggests that this record belongs to your ancestor, but in fact it doesn't. And I think Sean was alluding at that just now. So it's good to really double check and pay attention that the work you're doing actually belongs to your ancestor.
They could even be your ancestor, but not the correct ancestor. People named other people in their families after them. I have a great grandmother whose name was Ione, and I have a great aunt whose name was Ione. So this brother loved his sister so much that he named his daughter after her, but then there were all of these Iones in the family. So you need to know which ones you're dealing with and make sure that the dates really match.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Lisa. We'll finish up with Sean and Aisling now.
Thank you so much for listening to us, and I'll hand you over to Aisling.
Thank you, guys. We look forward to hearing from you, and thank you, Ben, for inviting us along.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you both. That was brilliant, just brilliant. And I'll just follow up with a few questions. First, noting, though, that it is so special. It's just remarkable that you can research someone's family history home site to such specificity. That must be very rewarding for you.
Absolutely, Ben. It's phenomenal. Sadly for me, I'm 35 years looking for my William Quinn. I know he was born in 1845 to 1850, and I know he was from Edgeworthstown, County Longford. His documentation was not there. So it's enough for me to go back to the area. But his wife, I took the family back to 1750, went back to the old house and took a stone out of the old wall in a phenomenal area known as Loch Crew, with 37 Neolithic cairns on the mountain. Wonderful, very mystical to go back and do that. So it's wonderful.
Amazing. And so powerful to, as you mentioned, be able to, as part of your trip to Ireland, visit places that you have a personal connection to. I mean, there's nothing better than that when traveling, I think.
Oh, absolutely, Ben. And for all the years in tourism, people said to me, Sean, you have a beautiful country. I'd say, did you have a good time? We went to Killarney, we went to Galway. But after all these years, I thought it was wonderful to get people off the beaten track. And that was very, very important, and it still is to me.
And yes, that's such a wonderful point, because I think people wonder, where off the beaten track should I go? Well, if you have a family history, you might as well follow that and go off the beaten track.
Definitely off the beaten track in genealogy in Ireland, yeah. You're so right, Ben.
And there's places that you can go in Ireland that really, the scenery looks exactly the same as when their ancestors were here. Yeah. It's very unchanged. It's amazing. You know, once you get out of the cities, it's unchanged. It's absolutely beautiful.
I had a fantastic story one time. It was around the late 1700s, and 250 years later, the same family were living on the same 4 acres. So that's phenomenal when we get back there and source the actual. That's the beauty of the 10-yard location. That's the beauty of it.
Wow. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And genealogy touring has become so popular in recent years. It's really become a place people want to explore, and they want to visit for that reason, which we've seen it change over the years, but it's very popular now.
Yes, for good reason. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sean and Aisling, I thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and your presentation. I look forward to meeting you one day in Ireland, and thank you so much as well for the incredible work that you do helping people find their family history.
Not at all. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And that connection that you would have with your family, or all the people that are listening, is so important, that we don't lose touch with our degree of generations moving back in time. Very important.
Well said. Thank you both.
Thanks, Ben.
Ben.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Well, they were just so friendly, and Finola and Tomasz as well. But, you know, the way they speak with such energy and enthusiasm, it reminds me of how kind the Irish are in general, aren't they, Lisa? Yeah, just wonderful people to converse with. And so that is our look at family history in Ireland and Poland. But Lisa, you have a piece of your family history to share with us. Are you ready for that now?
And it's not my German pancake recipe.
Well, that's pretty good, though.
So I just thought that I would share a story that I was told when I was a little girl. And my story comes with some good provenance. When I was young, about, let's say 10 years old, my grandmother was just doing something around the house, and she said, oh, I spoke with my cousin Julian, and he's been contacted by a West German film company asking about our cousin. And I was like, Oh, okay. That is very fascinating to me because I've always loved old Hollywood, and she said film production, but that was kind of where it went. And I put that away in my mind until I took my first trip to Europe when it was 1993, and I was I was visiting friends in Northwest Germany near Osnabrück, and I was with my friend Connie, and we were at her parents' house having coffee and kuchen. Your coffee and cake is sacred. Even in my family, my grandmother always made time. We had coffee and cake every afternoon. So we were having the coffee and cooking, and I said, oh, meine Großmutter's name was Scholl, because I was practicing my German. My German is still not very good. And she had some relatives named Hans and Sophie, and Casper, my friend Connie's dad, jumps up and runs over to what would have been the German equivalent of the Encyclopedia Britannica at the time. And he pulls up this entry for Sophie Scholl. And we've got the pictures on the screen right now, because this is Sophie Scholl on the right. She's about 21 years old. And I was about the same age, and I had the same haircut, same nose. The chin was very similar. It's not now, it's many years later, but so I was very struck by this, and they told me the story of Sophie and her brother Hans. And so I thought I would share that story with you. So they were born in Forchtenberg in Württemberg, which is not that far away from Munich. They were children of the local mayor. They went to the University of Munich, and first Hans, he had been sent as a medic to the Eastern Front, because we mentioned Russia a lot in this program today. And he came back after the summer was over, and he told his philosophy professor, and he told his sister what had been happening, what he had seen. And they formed a resistance movement called the White Rose. And so I learned about this, but I didn't do anything with that information until several years later. I went to Munich, and I went to go see the memorial, because there's a memorial to this group. And the first thing you notice is very easy to find, because Geschwister Schollplatz literally translates into the Scholl siblings place. So Geschwister is siblings. And this is at the University of Munich, and you're walking into the University of Munich, and this is on the ground outside. These are leaflets, because what this resistance group did, besides graffitiing down with Hitler on houses, is they dropped thousands of leaflets at the University of Munich, and we're working with some other resistance movements, some other groups nearby as well. And so these leaflets are the recreation of some of the leaflets that they dropped. And even early 1943, 2.5 years before the war ended, they were denouncing the persecution and mass murder of Jewish people. So here are the leaflets, and then among the leaflets are the 7 kind of core members of the White Rose who were executed by the Nazis. And then you go inside to the university building, and you see the building. Sophie Scholl was caught in 1943, early 1943. She was caught because they had been distributing leaflets. I think they'd done it 5 or 6 times at this point. No one knows why she did this, but at the very last minute, she had a stack of leaflets, and she put them on the balustrade and just tossed them off, so they rained down. And this is part of the lore of the White Rose, is these drifting leaflets of truth coming down. But that was how she got caught. And so she was rounded up with her brother, their philosophy professor, 3 others. And there is a memorial here inside the university building. So this is Sophie Scholl, and you can see at the bottom it says Denkstätte Weißes Rose. So there's a little exhibit about the group. And then there's underneath, that's the same picture, but underneath there's the names of all of those 7 members who were executed. She was arrested and taken by the Gestapo and interviewed for days, a couple of days. Her legs were broken during the interrogation. And she was given a summary trial, a kangaroo court. She was not allowed any defense, but she was sentenced to death along with these 6 other people. And so that is the story of the White Rose. It's not I don't believe it's hugely well known in the US, even though there have been at least 3 movies made about them. The 2005 movie was called The Final Days, and it was actually Oscar winning for German language film, for foreign language film. And I learned today, actually, doing the research for this, why the movie maybe is not so well known in the US. I'm actually going to look at my notes for this. So because the filmmaker pointed out that the death sentences that were carried out by the people's courts were still legally valid at the time the film was completed in 1982. And so he wrote that in the credits, and that upset a lot of people. So it wasn't allowed to be released in the US, and it wasn't sent to many film festivals. And then secondly, distribution of the film beyond West Germany was delayed because at the time, the wartime legal decision that outlawed the White Rose Group effectively banned foreign distribution of the film. And so that had to be rescinded before it was released. So that is the story of the White Rose, and that is the story of my distant relative.
That is unbelievable, Lisa. Thank you so much for gathering this and these amazing pictures for us.
You're very welcome. Though, yeah, I took all of those pictures myself. It was very exciting to go there and see that. But there are other memorials around to them.
And an example of why it's so wonderful to be able to travel to the place. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome, Ben.
Well, we're running a little long, but why don't we get to a few questions, perhaps? Gabe has been in the Q&A. Thank you, Gabe. Let's see here. Cynthia asks, is privacy a concern with online ancestry companies? Well, I can say that they don't make family members who are alive public, even if you allow your tree to be viewed publicly. That doesn't mean that there isn't any potential risk, just as there is with anything online. But I do know that they make some effort to keep particularly information of people who are alive in your family tree private. And plus, we're not putting anything really personal there. It's not like there's our address or our social security number or anything like that. I mean, it's...
Oh, but your birth date.
Is that enough? I mean, that's everywhere. What do you think?
Well, I don't worry much about privacy. I mean, there's so many things you can Google and find out so many things about people that I think that it's as reasonable a risk as anything else.
You have a question, Lisa?
I do. Monique is asking, were Jewish family history records destroyed during World War II? And I would like to take this one as a tour guide. In some places, they were destroyed just because of demolition from the war, from obliteration and bombing. But I would say the Nazis didn't specifically destroy Jewish family history records, because the one thing that you can say about the Nazis is they loved to keep very accurate records. So I wouldn't say that those records were necessarily destroyed. You have a lot more experience in Eastern Europe, though maybe the Russians coming through at the end of the war did.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer in detail, but I mean, certainly a number of records were destroyed, but it wasn't, there were many more records that were destroyed than just Jewish records, of course. But yeah, certainly many were harmed. Zara asks, do you know if the Irish heritage organizations mentioned tonight also help with Northern Ireland? And I know that at least for Epic, it is the entire island of Ireland. And actually, we discussed County Down, where my second great grandfather is from. That is one of the Northern Irish counties, and Epic was ready to assist me with that.
I think Sean and Aisling would have been ready to help you with that too.
Probably. I didn't actually specifically ask them about Northern Ireland. I did ask Finola, though, about Northern Ireland. But you are right. Probably both of them would be able to assist with Northern Ireland. Yeah.
And I think that it was maybe a little bit buried, but they do car and driver. Like if you want to go to Ireland and research your family and you're like, there's no way I'm driving on those little Irish roads, they will do that for you.
Yeah. Thank you for emphasizing that. And Tomasz, the same for Poland. Yeah.
Do you find it hard to drive in Poland?
I didn't, particularly outside of the cities. No, I think the roads are in great shape. Many of them are modern. They've had a lot of EU funds, so I don't think it's a problem. Yeah. Well, I think that's all we have time for tonight. I thank you all for joining us for this look at family history research in Europe with just the Ireland and Polish context, and for listening to Lisa and I share a few specific points of our family history research as well. Hopefully this gives you a few ideas. It's a very broad brush we painted, but there's many resources out there online. There's many people that can help. It can just be a little difficult to find the right source. So I wish you all luck in discovering your heritage if you wish to do so. And thank you, Lisa, for joining me for this as well.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the borscht. It's delicious.
Yes, and I will end with a joke that our wonderful video editor, Zen, who helped tremendously with this program, said to us a few minutes ago. I wish you all the borscht. I just had to, I'm sorry. Okay. Well,
You can't beat that.
thank you, Lisa, for that as well. Okay. And on that note, we go to the French Riviera next week. Lisa, you go to the French Riviera.
You go to the French Riviera.
Good night, Lisa. Good night, everyone.